These video clips are kind of, they don't look like it, but they're actually high def in some cases, so they're fairly large. What I want to show you is that these animals learn the traffic patterns of different streets, and they'll know when certain streets have street lights or when they don't have street lights. So, it's going to take a couple minutes for us to do this. So that's the only way that they can live down there. So one of the things that we found, so the biggest cause of death of coyotes in Chicago are cars. That's the biggest challenge for trying to live in the city. And what we found is that they learn the traffic patterns so that their risk of being hit by a car is no greater downtown than it is out here. So the coyotes out here at McGraw have just as much risk of being hit by a car as an animal that's living off of Lakeshore Drive. And that's because they adjust their activity patterns. So, yeah, unfortunately it's going to take a few minutes. This is a bad file. While we wait, is there any questions so far? So one of the things, once I'm done with this, you may ask, what are they eating? So that's one of the big parts of our research. And another kind of a first for our research, so the traditional method of looking at diet is to look at scat. And what we're doing is we're collaborating with University of New Mexico, where they can look at their whiskers. So we can look at their diet through the whiskers. Okay, I'm going to try not to crash this.
Stan, what would you say is the biggest popular misconception about coyotes?
The biggest misconception, I think there's a lot of them. I think the biggest one is that people think that they are a lot of risk, so that they're fairly dangerous to have around. So for the most part, that's not the case. So that's one of them. And then I think that probably the other one is that they are a lot more destructive in the natural world. So a lot of people think that they're an effective predator on certain things that they really aren't.
Like deer?
Like deer.
So will we sometimes hear that dogs and cats and domestic pets are at risk, are they?
So they are at risk,
Yeah.
right? But the risk is usually pretty low. So, and that's one of the things that we're trying to learn is like, when are they at risk and when are they not? And so we'll talk about that right after this video clip, or after a couple video clips, because that's what we've been focusing on. It's like what makes coyotes do what they do. And so here you'll see her crossing a road. So there she crossed again, that's not a busy road, so that was not very impressive. You'll see her crossing a busier road like right now. So she's using the sidewalks and the roads just like we do. She's going to go up to that stop sign, and she'll come up to that road. She's going to cross that road ahead of her. You can see it's fairly busy. She's looking to the left right now, and then she just ran across. She didn't hesitate. So she shot across because she saw that there was a gap in the traffic, but she doesn't always do that. So you'll see a different crossing pattern in just a second. Yeah, so that's our big question is like, why do some coyotes attack a dog and some don't? They do it for a variety of reasons, but most of them, again, don't. If you could watch them at night when we're tracking them, they're actually trying to avoid dogs, the vast majority of them. The times that they don't, it's usually litter related. So, for example, 748 became a problem animal because he became aggressive toward dogs, but it was only when they had the litter in the ground. And once that litter, they moved the litter, the coyotes did, and once they did that, then there was no more conflict. So, I don't want to touch this. There's Just gonna make another crossing here, but there'll be another one in just a second.
How long does the litter stay together?
So, good question. So how long do the litters stay together? So the litters, some of them will stay in their area for 6 to 9 months. Others will stay together for a year. We've had some that have stayed with their parents for 2 years. And rarely, we've had 1 or 2 animals actually hang around for longer than that. But usually 2 is about the max. So, so this is downtown. So she was actually not that far off of Michigan Avenue. And you'll see her actually interacting with some people. So here she's pretty irritated with us because she knows our truck, because it has a great big antenna on top. So, she's pretty, oh, and there was people there. So that's another reason why she didn't want to go. So anyway, here she's going to cross this road. She's actually standing. We'll see this cyclist go by. Behind him, she's standing there, actually watching the traffic right there. And once it's stopped, they're stopped at the light, then she'll cross the road. So again, it's the same animal, same territory, and in fact, that's all the same night. And she's using different strategies to cross these roads. And in fact, we'll zoom in here in a second. You'll see her going down this road. And if you look in the back, you'll see people walking back there. They won't see her. They won't know that she's there. So that's urban. Here's another quick example. I think this was shot by you, Shane? This is 881. Oh, it's Abby, right, right. So this is 881, which is the animal that I showed you a little bit earlier, and another urban animal. This is on the north side. Again, so this is their life for the most part. This isn't quite as urban as we saw earlier, 447, but it's still pretty busy.
What time of night is this roughly?
I don't know. So
I'm
usually
curious
at
how
least
late
10.
is, kind of like 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock versus midnight or 1 o'clock.
It would be between 8 and probably 1 a.m.
Okay.
Because that's usually as late as they stay out.
Okay.
Right. And so you'll notice people going right by her. And so again, they have to develop a certain level of comfort with people. One last thing, so this would be the pair. I just want to show one of those pairs that we were talking about. Let's see if it'll go. Oh, shoot. Yeah, I don't know if it's gonna, so this will be one of the clips that goes on. Yeah, it was just another video of actually a pair of them going together and marking on the streets. So they were marking the streets just like they would be marking a natural area. So that's the stomach content of one animal, so it's 9 rodents. We saw at the very beginning, I showed you an animal mousing, and that's generally what they're most adapted to do, but they're super flexible and they will take advantage of some of our food, but some of them don't. So some of them still continue to eat natural food. In fact, 748 is an animal, again, we can look at their whiskers and look at their diet across the length of their whisker. And we know that in his case, and that's about 6 months of growth, he did not eat any human food. That's off of Lakeshore Drive. And that's him again. So he was eating rabbits for the most part. So this would be an animal. So this is what it looks like. So even these urban animals eating natural food, this is what it looks like. So this would be an animal right off of interstate. And in this case, he's scavenging in the beginning, but then he's actually going to hunt. I just want to be able to demonstrate that they are eating. So they'll eat. They'll not only move along the interstates, but they'll actually eat because obviously there's good stuff to eat there as well. But I want to show you, what mousing looks like.
This was actually the video that I shot about a year or so back, and it's actually off of I-90 and North Avenue in Chicago, which is outside of like Lincoln Park.
So if you just watch him real close, you're gonna see mouse. So anyway, so a lot of people ask, well, where are they getting food? How do they do natural type of feeding in an urban area? This is one way that they're doing it. So there is some green space that you don't recognize when you're on your commute. That easement along some of those travel lanes actually provide habitat for these guys. So he's actually mousing.
What's a typical lifespan?
So a typical lifespan is going to be short. So now he's going to mouse right there. Yeah. So usually it would be around, well, it depends on what you're asking. So the average lifespan would be somewhere between 2 to 3 years. Maximum lifespan is like your typical medium-sized dog. So 12 to 13 years is a really old coyote. In our case, we can actually look at their teeth. After they die, we can pull a tooth and you can actually section it and you can look at rings, just like you can with trees. And by doing that, 14 years is the max. That's the oldest thing that we have in our study. I'm going to move on to this. So behavioral syndrome. So this is what we've done recently, and this is probably the last thing I'll talk about. But so we had 2 PhD students just recently graduate. They spent 5 years of their career working in this project. And so one of the things that they had to focus on was what we call behavioral syndromes or personalities. So that's a hot topic right now in science. It's starting, a lot of the work has been done with dogs and dog breeds. And so dogs are a really great species to try and look at how genes, your genetic makeup affects your behavior, because there's so much variability, and they've been selected for certain kind of behavioral traits. We wanted to take that idea and apply it to coyotes as well. This, as I mentioned, is a really hot topic, and there's a lot of work being done with dogs. So this was a German study, just for example, and this was just purely behavioral. They have a national data set where dog owners can report a series of different behaviors with their dogs. So they had over 5,700 dogs in their study for 98 breeds, and I just want you to notice that there's boldness and trainability. So boldness is on one axis and trainability is on the other. And those are dog breeds, so they're just looking at the breeds, not the individual animals. Those circles represent averages, and you can see that there are certain breeds that are clear over on the trainability side. So those are clear over on the right are highly trainable. The ones on the left are not. Roy could probably tell you all this without any studies at all. And then you have the boldness. And so the boldness, the ones up at the top are the most bold, the ones at the bottom are the least bold. And it's kind of what you would expect. But this is that was the first study to actually look at a massive, multi-thousand sample size. So that's what they're doing with dogs, and again, they're looking at the breed level. Now, in 2005, they did the full genome of dogs. So they have mapped out the complete DNA of dogs, and now they're exploring that DNA for different sections that might relate to behavior. And this was just last month, or at least in January. This was a study that was just recently published that actually is applying the genetics to the behavior. And in this case, they looked at 17,000 dogs. This is coming from the US. And this is, again, a national database that dog owners can follow the directions, record their behavior of their dogs, submit it, And so they have this massive data set. Well, they applied that also to a massive data set of DNA. And so they were able to see that there's about 130 different sections of the genome that relate to about 14 behaviors of dogs. But this is at the breed level. So we wanted to look at the genome of coyotes and actually look at the individuals. And so we wanted to see if, especially animals are more prone to being bold or aggressive, because you're asking about dogs, and are dogs at risk? Well, some coyotes are aggressive, some aren't. So we're trying to see whether or not there's a certain kind of personality that's being selected for. This is coming from that paper, and I'm not going to go into all that. The only thing, the point about this figure, there's a dog on the top and a human at the bottom with some bars. The whole point of that is that the 130 parts of the genome that they were looking at all relate to parts of the brain, the front part of the brain. It's the same region that is related to our behaviors as well in our brain. So what they found is that the same types of the parts of the genome that influence the cerebral cortex for dogs is also the same kinds of genes that affect our cerebral cortex as well. So the thought is that by learning how this interacts with dog behavior will help us understand human behavior. In our case, we don't really expect that coyotes are going to be a good roadmap for humans, but we think that there is a management implication of this, because if you can identify whether or not certain animals are more prone to be aggressive, that could also be used for predator management. So coyotes are the major predator of certain livestock, and some of them can be risky for either dogs or people. So if you can identify those that are most at risk, then you would know that, okay, that's an animal that we might want to get rid of, or we might have less tolerance for it. Others that are very low aggressiveness, then you might be more tolerant because they're actually going to be territorial and keep other coyotes out. These are the grad students that have done the work, Ashley Worth and Katie Robertson. So Ashley did some genetic work and behavior. Katie did behavioral stuff and some corticoid steroid stuff. So she's also looking at stress in these animals. So I'll talk about Katie's work real quick, not the whole thing, but just this. So she did novel object testing, so we could actually go out to our animals and their territories. So we have them radio collared, so we know where they're spending their time. She would put one of those two novel objects out in a standardized design and look at their response. And then we would measure that and then look to see whether or not it changes with urbanization. So a yard gnome is one of the novel objects. So that's a yard gnome, that's a coyote approaching it. And so the coyotes weren't the only things that approached the yard. So that was one of the big challenges to novel object stuff, actually. And she would document, what's the behavior? Are they scared of it? Are they not scared of it? Are they neutral? Or are they actually kind of bold with it? And so this is an animal that would be classified as bold because it's literally marking the yard gnome. And this is an animal that actually attacked the yard gnome. And one that pooped next to the... and then this is a pack that was this is an urban area, one of our urban packs. And you'll see differences in their behavior just within the pack. So that one's actually biting the rings. The other ones couldn't care less. So that's what we're trying to measure. This is unique. Now that we've done this, there's a move to actually standardize this technique, and they want to do a national study across multiple cities because the question is how applicable are our results to other cities. So they want to do this novel object testing across all the way from LA up to Washington, D.C. This is what she found. So this graph, I try not to show you too many graphs, but this is what she came up with. This is the percent that were bold, the visits, and based on whether it was in a natural area, like a forest preserve where the coyotes do not have much interaction with people, suburban sites, like where most people would live, or in the urban core, the downtown. What we found was that there's this nice linear relationship in which there's almost 30% of the visits would be considered bold in the more urban side, and very few, if any, in the more natural. So that's one measure. So that's one graph. I can't tell you how much work, so Shane's helping with that. It's a huge amount of work. That was 50 successful trials. That doesn't mean that they only did 50 trials, and it's just a ton of work. So it's a simple graph, but you just people don't realize just what goes into that. You might be curious about the steroid stuff. So the idea is corticosteroid is a steroid that relates to stress in animals and humans. And you can, depending on the tissue that you're sampling from, you can either be looking at short-term, like immediate stress, like right now. So if I collect blood, or if I have you exhale into a tube, that's immediate measurements. But in our case, we're looking at hair. That would measure chronic stress. And so the question is, are those downtown animals at a greater level of stress than other animals? And again, this hasn't been done before. And what she found, those are bars of averages, and they don't vary across the landscape. If you saw those videos of those animals, you probably would have guessed. They don't look too stressed down there. But you ask people, and if they haven't watched them, they would probably assume it would be a really hard life downtown. So anyway, Ashley's work combines behavior with genetics, and so she would actually measure the behavior of the animals in a trap, so that's an animal that's trapped, as well as the behavior of animals in the lab. So they would carefully score the behavior of these animals as they're being manipulated. Again, this is completely standardized, same people as much as possible, and the same observers. And then they would be taken into the lab. So this is a very calm animal, and then you just saw one that was not so calm when they're being noosed. So this is actually, we would do a hand test in the lab. And, oh, sorry. Let's see if this works. So this is an animal in the cage, and with the grad students, the nice thing is you can make them do all kinds of stuff that they don't do. So they have to volunteer their hand and stick it in the cage.
It's funny, you see, he said grad student, but I'm looking at the shoes right now, those are my shoes. But Ashley did most of it, Ashley did most of it.
Yeah.
Got scars, Shane?
No. Do not. I'm sure Stan will tell you why here in a second, because of the number of
Yeah,
animals that
so-
actually struck.
If I can show you, I'm going to show you this. So this is what is typical. So I have to open the cage from the top, and it's a fake hand. So I would not ever get this passed through OSU. So that's actually probably more interest than most of the coyotes exhibited. So, but very few of them ever attempted to bite. It's actually pretty rare for them to do that. So this is pretty normal. They act very passive and fearful. So of course that's in a cage and in the lab. So this is a tricky part about behaviors, and especially trying to describe personalities, because all of you have different personalities, and yet you're all acting pretty much the same because of the context. So same thing could be happening here as well. So it's hard to do, but if you do it enough, and you do it with enough different animals, then you start to see a pattern. So what she found was the same thing that Katie found. It's a hard graph to see, it's taken straight off of her stuff. But if you move over to the right-hand side, that's the urban. This is boldness, and you see a huge spike in boldness as you move into the urban area. So the early results are starting to show, at least behaviorally, you're seeing more bold animals in the city. genetically, I won't go into all of her results, but what she did find was that some of those markers have been found to be good markers for dogs, are also some markers that have, correlate with behavior for coyotes as well. So the next stage is to see over time, to see if that's changing, and if we're creating more bold animals or not. And then the other thing that we found is that there's a disconnect between boldness and aggressiveness. So they're not the same thing. The other thing you might be curious about, so she tested 137 coyotes, which is a huge sample size. Only 7 of them ever generated nuisance reports at all. And the majority of those were not aggressive. There's only 1 animal out of the 137 that actually acted aggressively. So it's not common in the population, but again, we're going to see if that changes over time. So with that, I'm going to pass on. I was going to show you some of our goose and especially our deer work. I'll just point out the goose work we did historically, that also represented a huge amount of work. And what we found was that coyotes are having an influence on goose populations. They're depressing or slowing their growth, which is a positive thing. In terms of deer, this is what we're working on right now. This is another very complicated, hard project to do. Another grad student is finishing up there. Deer represent the most dangerous wild animal out there in terms of deaths and injuries to people through deer auto collisions. So anything that can help kind of control their numbers is a good thing. And what we're finding in terms of fawn survival, this is super complicated and hard to do, so I won't go through all the details, but we have to get to the fawns before anything else does, and so there's technology that we can use to do that. And what we're finding, just real quick, so that's a little fawn that the techs got to in time. And what we find is that coyotes definitely are a major predator on fawns, or at least in the forest preserves that we've measured so far. So these are annual variations. So this is a number that survived 1 year, or the percentage. And so anywhere from 21% to 67%, but that 67% was only 1 year. Rest of them are 30 to 20% survival for fawns. And it's all coyotes. And so those blue bars represent coyote predation. So these are mortalities over age. And basically for the first 3 weeks of life is where all of the coyote predation takes place. After they get past the 3rd week, then there is no coyote predation to speak of. And there's almost no mortality from any other sources after that either. So if you don't have coyote predation, you have a lot of deer. So anyway, so that pretty much is all I have for you. Do you have any questions? Yeah.
You're talking about boldness towards humans, but what about dogs? I know little dogs, like Shih Tzus and whatnot, but we have an 80-pound golden, and there's a pack of goldens in our neighborhood that are actually around in dawn and still daylight. And I'll let our dog wander our property where my wife is extremely paranoid. Should we be?
I don't know if I would be paranoid. I would just be, I would watch it. So I have other slides where we actually looked at dog attacks in the Chicago area over like a 10 to 15 year period, the reports anyway, and we looked at breeds that were attacked and how frequently they were attacked. And there are a few cases of golden retrievers.
8 pounds?
What's that?
A big 80-pounder?
Yeah, so that can happen. But what happens, it's very rare, so I wouldn't, if it were me, I wouldn't worry too much about it. But if they, once you get to a certain size, even if they're attacked by the coyotes, it's usually not very serious. So they may nick them, and you might have to get a couple stitches.
Really?
But that's about it. No, we didn't have any mortalities of dogs that were, say, 25 to 30 pounds or larger. So the coyotes are 30 to 35 pounds. And the other thing is for...
Even a pack of 3?
So the only time larger dogs were attacked at all was by at least a pair, if not more. But they have a hard time even with an 80-pound animal. But they will cut them up a little bit, just a little bit. So, but again, it's very rare. So Again, that's over like 2 cases out of 16 years.
Okay.
So it's not common.
Good.
The thing, I would keep a little closer watch over the next couple months, because now they're gonna have litters. So they'll have litters in April, and so they'll be a little bit more aggressive. But you just got through a pretty aggressive part right now. So February is the peak mating period, and so that's when their hormone levels are their highest. And again, they only mate once a year, so their hormone levels are dropping right now, but once they have their litter, they're gonna maintain that territorialism for just a little bit longer, and then it'll drop after that. No, it's a good question though. Yeah.
There was, I don't know, a TV show, Coyote.
Mhm.
Anything to that, or was that a myth, or?
Yeah, so our research is actually in that program. So the question is about coy wool. So there's a program that came out, it was actually on PBS. And so the origin of that is that eastern coyotes, especially coyotes in the far northeast, have a small amount of wolf DNA. It turns out that even now, the most recent genetic analysis of coyotes in Illinois also found a very, very small amount of wolf DNA. When the first messages about that came out for the eastern coyote, the ones in the far northeast, people focused on that, the media picked up on it, and scientists also created some of that problem themselves, and they got called a coy wolf, which people assumed is a 50-50 wolf coyote, and it's actually a historic hybridization, mating that took place, many generations ago. So it's a very small proportion of wolf DNA, and part of our work up in Nova Scotia was working with those eastern coyotes up there, and I can tell you that you would be hard pressed to be able to tell the difference between them and coyotes here. So they're all just coyotes. Coyotes can have a little bit of dog in them as well. In fact, our coyotes probably have a slightly more dog in them than wolf. And other coyotes, for example, Ohio coyotes, have almost 8% to 10% dog in them on average, and about 2% wolf. So it's just part of their eastern heritage, is that as they spread eastward, and they were rare, that you have these historic breedings that took place. That's when you get a hybridization, is when one species is really rare, and they don't have a lot of options. Normally, coyotes have high standards, but if they don't have a lot to choose from, then they will breed with a dog. So, and we've seen a little bit of evidence of that occasionally with our animals too. So not a lot, but we have some really, really dark animals, and that's usually a trait of a historic breeding with a dog. Again, generations ago. Yeah. So that's where the coy wolf is coming from. So there's a small amount of wolf DNA in northeastern coyotes.
So, since we're on top of the wolves, they're slowly coming down further south. When do you expect to see wolves in Illinois on a large scale?
Oh, on a large scale. I was going to say, we've already had wolves
But,
in Illinois.
mhm.
But on a large scale, I don't know if we'll ever see them on a large scale.
Really?
On a large scale, I think we would be lucky to have maybe 4 to 5 packs, maybe. I don't think they'll last. They'll get shot. We don't have a large enough area, at least in northern Illinois, to really have them. We can get them temporarily, but what happens, and this is what's happened on the ones that have come down, is they get shot. So it's just hard. Now the Wisconsin, I think the last time I looked, Wisconsin still has a harvest on their wolves. Yeah, and so that's going to slow that down quite a bit. So it's going to take even longer for wolves to get to Illinois in any great number.
And they're not as prolific as coyotes.
No, they're not as prolific as coyotes. No. So they also have higher energy requirements. So I didn't go into that, But once you get to a certain size, and it's actually 30 to 40 pounds, that's the threshold. When, as a predator, you get above that size, you have to eat large prey to be able to maintain your energy requirements. And so they have to eat deer. And so we do have a lot of deer around here, but you'd be surprised how quickly deer can start to be, again, wolves are territorial, so you're going to set up a territory. They have two constraints against them. One is they have to move across that landscape and avoid people, both roads. They're not as good at crossing roads as coyotes are. And they have to stay off people's property and not get shot. So that's just the movement, and then they have to be able to take advantage of deer. And they will go through deer pretty quickly. So those are the two things that kind of are the challenge for them, as opposed to coyotes, which they can change their diet on anything. They are below that threshold, so they can actually, that's why they can live off rodents forever, and rabbits. Wolves can't. So it's a little more challenging. If you didn't have people shooting them, then we would have wolves here. We would definitely have wolves here, for sure.
So are there no laws other than our local laws of shooting coyotes or killing coyotes? If I had a coyote on my property, I could kill it?
I think you have to have a license.
If I had a licensed gun?
Yeah, but you can, but they are pretty flexible about nuisance. Like if you were to say, I have a cat, or I have a dog, and if you don't have an ordinance, like if you're not in town, then you could probably get away with shooting it without a permit, without a license, maybe. But licenses are cheap, so. And you have coyote hunt clubs. So coyote hunt clubs that go out and hunt coyotes every weekend. They do. They go out on ATVs and radios and they go hunt coyotes. You have the other people hunting coyotes, the fox hunters that have now become coyote hunters, right? So they're not much of a pressure. They rarely get a coyote, but they still try. And then you have some counties, so it wasn't that long ago,